Hope for Anxiety and OCD, Episode 6. In today's episode, I am talking to music therapist and public speaker Tim Ringgold. Tim has a vast knowledge of how music affects the brain and how we can engage with music and utilize it in a very specific way to help us calm down. I learned so much from interviewing Tim, and so I'm really excited to share this episode with you. Hi, welcome to Hope for Anxiety and OCD.
Thanks so much for having me, Carrie. It's great to be here.
Yeah. So I know a little bit about you, but I actually don't know a whole lot. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do?
Sure. I'm a board certified music therapist, which is someone like a physical therapist uses exercise to help people in a clinical setting. I was trained in school how to use music in a clinical setting to help people. And people help themselves with music all day long. So sometimes it's like tales of the obvious to people. Like, oh yeah, I do that all the time.
Sure.
Like, yes, you do. And then sometimes it's like, well, there are situations where the targeted use in the hands of a clinician, where music really can help people in certain circumstances throughout the lifespan. And so that's what my training is. We all know it's good for our mood and it's good for our spirit, but my training is really how music affects the brain and the body, and particularly the nervous system. So that's kind of what I get excited to kind of empower people to understand their nervous system and how to regulate it with music.
That's really awesome. I think I've been a therapist for over 10 years, and I can't remember ever actually meeting a music therapist.
I know. We're a rare breed. There's only about 8,000 of us nationwide. Contrast that with there's 900,000 members of the APA, so it's like it's
a big difference.
Yeah. I am usually the first music therapist someone meets.
So how did you become a music therapist?
Well, I started out as a musician. Music therapists are musicians first.
Okay.
And I started out on stage when I was 4 and started singing right out of the gate. And then, was pursuing a career as a rock musician because that seemed like a very healthy, stable, financially, no, none of those things apply when it comes to rock music. But yeah, I didn't want to do, if you want to get a degree in music performance, it's either opera or musical theater. And I wasn't interested in either of those. So I went rock and roll because I'm totally a rebel, but I grew up Catholic, Connecticut, prep school, all the boxes of conformity. And then I was just like, I'm not any of this. And I kind of exploded when I was 22. And I joke that I came out as a musician. And my family was devastated. And
wow.
Yeah, they were just like, oh my God, well, it must have been the drugs. And no joke, they said that out loud. So I was like, I'm so sorry to disappoint you. I'm a musician. And there was an intervention with my family because, rock music's crazy and it's unhealthy. These things are not, it's not that those aren't true. That was my lifestyle. But when, I wanted to settle down. I didn't know, I was engaged and I just couldn't imagine the future of being on the road and being in a committed relationship, having kids, trying to stay sober, trying to stay faithful on the road. Are you kidding? In rock and roll, struggled. And I was like, this is just going to be a lose-lose. And one day, someone sent us this cute little book for an engagement gift called The Hard Questions. 100 questions every couple should ask before tying the knot.
Wow.
And it talks about career and family and yada, yada. And so my wife, she had her MBA at the time, so she could see her future, corporate, clear, pie charts, graphs. And I just looked into the black hole of the music industry and I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do with my life? And she just encouraged me, if you want to go back to school, we can afford it. Parentheses, I don't want to marry a grumpy never was, So I scrolled from A to Z in the index of majors at my local university, Carrie. A to Z. I just scrolled, is there anything interesting here? And sure enough, I bumped into the two words music therapy on this scrolled list. And I was like, oh, stop it.
Is that for real?
Yeah, because I had been a musician and I was an athlete. So I used to work in physical therapy, but I found it to be just tissue. And so it was like, didn't touch the emotions, didn't touch the spirit, didn't go deep enough for me. And I wrote a paper in college, Carrie, called Music versus Medicine, because I thought I had to choose one or the other. And then I found a field where I could combine the two. And my life literally changed direction in a single moment. And I have not looked back since.
Wow, that's awesome. And so now you actually travel and speak to people about how to reach for music.
Yeah, that's it. I noticed early on in my internship that I enjoyed speaking about music. I like doing music therapy, but I also really just love talking about it. And one of my colleagues said to me, she goes, you're a good music therapist, but the American Music Therapy Association should literally just hire you to go around and talk about music therapy because you're just really good at talking about it. And I was like, thank you. I like that idea too. And so I got booked in one day I got an email. And it was the National Hemophilia Foundation had found my blog that I'd written about my special needs daughter. And they were like, here's a dad, special needs dad, who knows how to use a non-opioid based approach for pain management. And so they said, we'd like you to come speak at this summit that we're doing. And you'll be faculty, and we pay faculty. And it was like 15 times how much I made an hour as a music therapist. And I was like, I am a speaker. But I was like, this is a whole different world. And that began kind of this quest that I've been on for the last 7 years to just speak more and more, because then I also realized that I could plant the seeds about how to use music yourself to really big groups of people really fast. And for me, it's always been kind of like this journey of wanting to help the most people. Like, it's like almost like a numbers game. I want to go wide. I like going deep with one person, but after a while, I was in treatment rooms working with one patient at a time, and there's only so many patients a week because there's only so much of me that can go around.
Right.
And I felt like my impact was, well, I don't know what the right word is, but just I couldn't scale my impact. I couldn't can and clone myself. Right. But when I got up on a stage, I could have 800 professionals in a ballroom all getting the same message at the same time. And I was like, oh, yes, please. And so that developed into what I do full time now. So now I have a clinical staff that does the music therapy, and I do all the speaking.
Awesome. You're also the second person that I've interviewed who said somebody else told them, hey, you should be doing this. You have the talent, skills, and abilities to be doing it. And they weren't doing it at the time. And it's just always interesting how other people can see things that we can't see in ourselves. That happens in therapy all the time.
Totally. And, there's a phrase that I use, which is that you cannot see the frame when you're in the picture. So, you have blind spots all around you. Your peripheral vision, you only see so far, but everybody else sees all the way around. And so they see a dimension of you just can't see. And so that's why being willing to hear what others have to say is a really useful ability, because the listener can't see this right now, but we're on Zoom. So I can wave my hand to you, but right now I can't see my hand.
Right.
But you can. Mm-hmm. But in my perception, there's no hand, except there's a hand, right? So how many times in life, right, are we walking around and there's something right there,
right next to your head?
Everybody else can see it, but you're like the last one to get it. And that in and of itself is so much of my work in mental health. Because there's such a stigma around mental health.
Right.
People unwilling to turn and look and see that there is something amiss right next to them. And I had one teen who told me once, he goes, yeah, that's like addiction, man. You're the last, everyone else sees it before you. I thought that was like really profound, right? Oftentimes we will feel discomfort, dis-ease, symptoms in our body. We're the first to know. when it comes to our physical health. When it comes to our mental health, because there's such a different attitude about mental health in the culture, we don't necessarily, when we feel dis-ease or discomfort mentally, we don't have the same freedom to just go, you know what? I keep thinking about killing myself. This is not normal because I'm designed to survive. Like my DNA is programmed for survival. So why do I keep thinking about killing? That doesn't make any sense. Being able to have the freedom to just say that out loud and not be institutionally locked up for 72 hours.
Right.
Oh, right. As a mandated reporter, your doctor, your physical doctor is not a mandated reporter if you're having physical symptoms.
Right.
Like, they don't physically lock you in a physical hospital for 72 hours for anything. You can get up and walk out at any time. You're free.
Right.
It could be called AMA, against medical advice. But physically, you're free to do what you want. Mentally, it's another story. We have a completely different relationship to mental health in this country than physical health. And I think that's a real challenge for people because the human experience, everybody's having physical symptoms and everybody's having mental symptoms. But if you're not free to talk about the mental symptoms the way you are the physical symptoms, what people do is they wait until their body turns it into physical symptoms. And then they go try to treat the physical symptom, which is the symptom, but not the source.
That happens with anxiety all the time, right? So people will show up at the ER. I think I'm having a heart attack. I think I'm dying. And they will get fully checked out. And the result will be, we think you had a panic attack.
Yes. Yep. Anxiety attack. And I can't breathe. I physically can't breathe. And it's a somatic sensation.
Absolutely.
Just like depression can be a somatic sensation of heaviness, anxiety can be this somatic experience as well of like being like, I can't catch my breath. And they physically can't. You can see they're shallow breathing and they're starting to hyperventilate. And my daughter has anxiety and I watch it and she's 14. So it's a kind of a fascinating journey of adolescence, puberty, hormones, and mental health. And like trying to navigate when is this hormones of adolescence and puberty? When is this an anxiety attack? And, as a clinician, like I can tell you, there are times when I can see like we are crossing into the red zone now where we're having a panic attack and she cannot recover her breath and I have to work with her. And it's really scary. But now that, like if we took her to a hospital, they'd check her out and they'd be like, there's nothing wrong with you. And then they'd say something like, it's a panic attack, but we don't treat that, right? We don't treat that here. So it's a real challenge in our culture.
Absolutely. And you talked a little bit about growing up Catholic, and I'm curious what your experience of that interaction between mental health and the church is, because that's super interesting to me.
Yeah. So I'm happy to tell this story because I think it's instructive for a lot of other people's experiences of growing up in a religious family. Because for me, I believe in kind of a biopsychosocial spiritual model of the self. So you're having this experience of being you in 4 dimensions, and you can experience pain in all 4 dimensions, but that presents in your brain the same way. It doesn't matter if you're suffering grief or you're suffering a bruise. Your brain doesn't know the difference in terms of where it shows up as pain. It just, the signal is pain. It could be emotional pain. It could be physical pain. If you're getting bullied, it's social pain. You can have spiritual pain. I didn't really understand this until maybe my mid-40s. I'm in long-term recovery for sex addiction, and my ACEs score is 0. So I have 0 adverse childhood experiences, which is a massive predictor of addiction and mental health in adulthood. And if those who are listening have not been exposed to ACEs, it's a really valuable tool to look at. It's scientifically validated. The Adverse Childhood Experience Survey, ACEs. And I would be in 12-step rooms and I'd hear guys talking about physical abuse, sexual abuse. And I felt like, well, what's the matter with me? Uh, I don't have anything wrong with me. And then finally, as I started to look in this 4-part dimension of spiritual pain, I realized in my house, I was crying myself to sleep when I was 8 years old, convinced I was going to hell because I had
Wow.
forgotten to say my Our Father the night before when I was going to bed.
Hmm.
And I had this imagery of me falling asleep, and I equated it to falling to hell because I couldn't stay awake. It was so hard to stay awake to say my prayers, but it was so easy to just fall asleep. And so I started to, and I'd see images in art of, hell and torture. Like, they're the most horrible, glorified, horrifying, traumatic visual things that a child I've ever seen in my life were pictures of people describing this religious thing called hell. So I grew up totally traumatized by the idea that I was going to hell because I was told there were these rules you had to follow. You get one chance, and there's this whole idea of sin and sin and sin and sin. And when you grow up in the Catholic and in the Christian world, you cannot walk 5 feet without having that word thrown at you. And you just, like, as a kid, I'll just speak for me, like, it was like a math equation. At a certain point, I was doomed by and what I was what I was doomed by? I was doomed by being a human being. I was doomed by the things that every human being does. I was like, this is an equation where there's no way I don't end up in hell. And wait a minute, I'm not a murderer. I'm not a rapist. I'm not, like, if I'm ending up in hell, everybody's ending up. And I was like, this is, now I have an 8-year-old myself, and the image of my son crying himself to sleep because he's afraid he's going to hell breaks my heart.
Right.
And except that was my childhood. And no one knew. I never told anybody because I was scared to death to talk about that kind of stuff. And I think, a lot of people leave the church when they get old enough to physically leave the church for a really good reason, because well-intentioned people put the fear of hell into them. I mean, we talk about put the fear of God into somebody.
Mm-hmm.
I can't square myself with anybody who thinks that the idea of an all-loving God and the fear of God at the same time can hold the same space. Like, cool, that's for you, great, but I'm not signing on to anything where I am afraid of my creator, that I am afraid for my eternal soul. Like, that has no place in inspiring me to be a good person. It didn't work. All it did is it inspired me to find pornography, because as soon as I found pornography, I found relief. I found something that captivated my imagination, took my mind completely out of the terror for a period of time while I was in the very same place that I was crying myself to sleep, which is alone in my room at night. And so when people have to understand that addiction is not a problem, addiction is a solution to a problem.
Yes.
People who don't have a problem don't have an addiction. Most adults recreationally use drugs and illegal substances and alcohol, which is legal, and then they spontaneously stop using it after a 10-year period. The data on it is overwhelming in the United States. And food, yes. Mm-hmm. They come to a decision, this isn't working for me, and they just stop whatever it is. They just stop doing it. For a small percentage of people who have adverse childhood experiences, who have trauma, who are chronically stressed, their nervous system has been hijacked by past events and current events, and they're now reaching for something in an attempt to self-soothe their nervous system, and it becomes a feedback loop where they reach for something to self-soothe. It works in the moment. It causes problems afterwards. They feel shame, guilt, pain of some sort, disconnection. So then, once again, they're in a stress response. So then their brain craves to be self-soothing. So then they reach for it again, and it becomes this vicious circle that they can't get themselves out of. And when I work with people to help them understand this cycle, it's like, the stressed brain craves relief by design. So when you have depression, when you have anxiety, you have dis-ease in your brain and in your body. You feel discomfort.
Absolutely.
The brain's job is to comfort itself. A craving is a design. It's well built. The reason we can't withstand cravings is because they're supposed to work. We want to self-soothe. We want to self-regulate. Our nervous system has 3 gears. It wants to be in its what we would call a safe, default, relaxed, aware state, which would be identified as the ventral vagal state. That's where our nervous system is running. The parasympathetic aspect of our autonomic nervous system is running the show. Our prefrontal cortex is online. We're able to be creative. We're able to connect emotionally. We're able to consider the past, consider the future, all the best parts about being a human being, why we've dominated the world in terms of the natural landscape. They're all available to us when we're in that state. Most of that goes offline, though, when we are called upon to either outrun a tiger or fight off a tribe. So we have this second gear, this sympathetic nervous system response, the fight or flight gear, where the amygdala suddenly activates and takes over and kicks the prefrontal cortex to shotgun and says, I'm going to get us out of here. And now we are in reactive mode. We're not in creative mode. And it changes our body physiologically, right? Like blood sugar changes, blood pressure changes, right? Hormones are released in that moment. And it's really great in the moment. And then the moment is designed to pass. But in our chronically scheduled, overstimulated 21st century world, we're now getting that stress response chronically, daily, multiple times a day.
Right.
And, the brain and the body are not designed to work that way. So it's overwhelmed. So it gets stuck. It gets in this feedback loop, right? And now it's like, oh, I'm stressed out. Why am I stressed out? Because I'm so used to being stressed out. And that is a real challenge. It presents huge physical problems. Type 2 diabetes, massive, massive connection to chronic stress because what it does to your blood sugar. Like the same diet, if you're stressed versus if you're not stressed, your body metabolizes the same diet differently. So it has real health implications, heart implications, stroke implications, like addiction, low libido, anxiety, depression get exacerbated. All these things when we get stressed are like at risk. And we live in a culture where there is no break. There's no time to slow down. So for me, my job is to teach people where are these moments happening in their day? And then how do we insert music into these moments? Because the funny thing about music in nature and with our nervous system is that when we make music in some way with our body or we listen to music that we enjoy, our nervous system re-regulates. So it turns the stress response off fast.
That's incredible.
It is incredible. And we know this intuitively. Like, you've been in a funk, a song comes on and like, bloop, like transformation. But like the science behind it, how we are in the Western world, we have to study it and then tell you it happened. And we're like, thanks. Okay. I already knew that. Yeah. My whole degree, Carrie, is Tales of the Obvious, chapters 1, 2, 3, 4. Let me tell you about music. I already knew that. Yeah, but here's why it works and here's how it works. Oh, okay. Now it's real. Okay. So a lot of times I'm telling people what they've already experienced and what they already do, but now they understand like it's legit, that this isn't wishful thinking. This is real stimulus response experience in the body happening at a preconscious level. I used to work in the hospital where I would go into the ICU. I was referred for patients who had an elevated blood pressure, heart rate, and respiratory rhythm, even though they were in a coma. And I would slow their heart rate, their blood pressure, and their respiratory rhythms down just with my guitar.
Wow. That's great.
It's really, like, really? Yeah, they're in a coma? Yeah, but their ears are still receiving this auditory signals from the environment. And our body's a rhythm machine, and you can slow down your body's rhythms by introducing a slow tempo in the environment around it. So I would just look at their heart rate on the monitor like it was a click track or a metronome, and I'd start playing along with it. And after about 5 minutes, I'd start to slow down my guitar and their body would slow down in response. And that was when I really was like, okay, this is legit.
This really works.
Yeah.
So do you encourage people to listen to certain types of music for when they're anxious or when they're depressed?
Yeah, it's a really great question. People want to know like what's the right and wrong stuff to listen to. So if you're not up for making it, so there's a couple of things. One is with anxiety, a lot of times your focus is no longer in the present.
Right.
You're kind of wrapped up. It's a kind of a disembodied experience as a trigger to an embodied sense of panic. But the disembodied part is you're up in your head, perseverating over a future that you're convinced is going to happen.
A bad future, not a good
bad
future.
Yeah, not an exciting future, right? Because the brain, this is the thing, the brain's designed not to thrive. It's designed to survive. So the brain defaults to a negative scenario out of survival because a false positive keeps you alive. A false negative, you're lunch for the tiger. So the way that our nervous system and our brain designed itself for survival was to default to a negative potential. So this could be bad, right? Mm-hmm. And that's we have a very old operating system. It's designed to do that. So people naturally default to the negative. There's nothing wrong with you. That's your survival instinct. Problem is they get caught in a feedback loop about it and they believe the thought.
Right.
Right. It's just a thought and it's designed in a certain way, but we believe it as, the future. And then we get stuck in it. And then now we're no longer present. We're out of our head. We're out of our body. We're up in our head. And so the first thing we want to try to do is when we reach for music, the style of music isn't so important as that it's something that is enjoyable to me. So it's very personal. It's like flavor. It's very personal. But I don't want to stop with just reaching for it to listen to it. I want to make music with it. So if I've got my phone and I've got my earbuds in and I put on a playlist of music that inspires me that I've already put in there for just such an occasion, what I want to do is I want to either tap along on my body with the beat, with the music. I want to hum along with the melody. I want to actually, what we say, there's this nerdy word called audiate, which is like when you sing in your head, but not out loud.
Okay.
Right? So you can sing along with a song in your head and you're not actually using your mouth, but your brain is doing all of the calisthenics to produce the pitch and the tempo and the words in your head. And then what happens is you just activate your vocal cord if you want to release that out into the environment. So you can just sing along in your head. You can sing along out loud, even better. But any way that you can activate your body to match the music, then your body is involved. And that's a huge component for people with anxiety, is because getting back into your body brings you back into the present moment, because the only place your body is in the present moment.
Right.
So the challenge with remembering that is you got to remember it. But if you just turn on music and you try to play along with the beat or tap along with the beat, you're just trying to keep the beat. And by virtue of trying to keep the beat, now you're back in your body and you're back in the present moment, because music's time-based. And when we play music, in order to keep the beat, we have to be present. The challenge with listening to music is listening to music can become a very disembodied experience.
Passive versus active.
Yes. And it engages your imagination and your memory. So you can be listening to a song and you can float away. The song can take you to where the song is. And so it's a disembodied experience when you just listen to the song.
Right.
You've had this experience where you listen to a song that you have heard before and you have a memory associated with that song.
Absolutely.
So suddenly, boop, you're no longer in the present moment. You are back wherever that was. And it could be good, could be bad. Same thing can happen in the future. You can hear a song and it can trigger your thoughts and your feelings and your emotions about the future, because there's nothing holding you. The song itself isn't holding you in the present moment unless you try to engage with it with your body. So that's why making it is, for people with anxiety, it is really, really critical that A, you have music you enjoy that you know lifts you up, but B, when you put it on, you go move your body to it. So what I tell people to do is to have a power playlist. It's 3 songs that fire you up. And when you feel the anxiety strike, you put the playlist on, put in your earbuds, get up and go for a walk, and you walk to the beat. Because everybody walks in rhythm. And if you can't go walk to the beat and you have to be stationary, then tap along with it or hum along with it. But be in the present moment, making music with the music. And you don't have to be a musician to do this, because when you clap to the beat, you don't consider yourself a musician. If you tap your leg to the beat, you don't consider yourself a musician, but you're doing the very same thing. You're activating your body in the present moment. And I think that's more important than the actual material that's in the music, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to the material that's in the music, here's what we know from research. Typically, if you are struggling with depression or anger, particularly, what's going to happen is the music you reach for might do one of 3 things. Typically, people will reach for music that matches their mood. That's normal.
Sure.
Because we want to kind of validate where we are intuitively. And it may, so angry people, if they listen to angry music, it may do one of 3 things. It may reduce the anger because they now have this resonance with something, they feel validated, it's cathartic. So that actually reduces the anger. Sometimes it doesn't do anything to the anger. It has no effect at all. They just engage in the music and they feel as angry as they did beforehand. Sometimes it actually exacerbates the feelings of anger. And I would submit that anger and anxiety are more related than anxiety and depression, because I feel like anger and anxiety are hyper-regulated, hyperactive states, whereas depression is kind of a hypoactive state. Mm-hmm. So there's this correlation, but not identical, but correlated. So if you're in a hyper-regulated, hyperactive state, there's the chance that you could exacerbate that. And we've read from research with teens where, same with depression, they listen to sad music when they're depressed. The music doesn't make them sad. They were sad and they reached for the music that matched their sadness.
Right.
So, but the music either makes them feel better, doesn't change the sadness, or actually exacerbates it, makes it worse. So it's really important for people to notice what's happening in their body as they're listening to the music they reach for, because there's no stamp of this, then that when it comes to music. And we've even had anecdotal, I guess, evidence. I think anecdotal evidence is like an oxymoron, but case studies where kids will say, I used this music at one time to actually make myself feel worse. And then the song changed, the meaning of it changed, I felt better. And then the song became like a badge of survivorship, and that I made it through, and the song took on a new meaning. And now when I hear the song, I actually feel more inspired. And it's like, wow, that's really complex. Mm-hmm. And people don't want complex. They want simple solutions, right? So when it comes to music listening is very nuanced and it's very complex. And that's why I try to encourage people music making, because the music making it's a motor cortex embodied physical experience happening in the present moment. And it is not really subject to these nuances of context. And it's just, here's the beat. The beat's happening now. Oh, the beat's getting faster. Oh, I got to keep up with the beat right now. There's no emotional discussion about the beat. That's right. There's the beat. Okay, I'm going to tap along with the beat. If you're feeling elevated and you want to slow your heart rate, blood pressure, respiratory rhythm down, the principle we use is called the ISO principle and the law of rhythmic entrainment. So you start with music that's up tempo to match how you're feeling. And then you pick music that gradually slows down. So your playlist would be like, the first song is the fastest of the 3.
Okay.
The second song is a little bit slower in tempo. And the third song's a little bit slower than that. But not like shocking, just gradual.
Sure, just gradually going down.
Like if you've ever been to any kind of cardio class or DJ, if you really pay attention, the music they pick usually starts slow during the warm up, and then it picks up, but gradually, and then it peaks. And then at the end, during the cool down, the tempo, the speed of the music slows down. The intensity of the music slows a little bit because we're warming down. We're bringing it down at the end. So that kind of tempo arc or speed arc, if you will, that's really what your body responds to more than anything. It's going to respond to that.
Yeah, so I'm curious about like if you could integrate spirituality in that, because as someone who's gone to church her whole life, typically you start out with the fast praise and worship song, everybody's clapping. Typically nobody starts a worship set with a slow song unless they're just really trying to throw you off or something.
No, but I will submit that the band or whoever's running the soundboard oftentimes has prelude music before the opening
also true
song. And then that prelude is usually lower, slower tempo intensity than the opening song. So there is usually some sort of entrance, if you will, into this experience, and it doesn't start here. Or at least that's been my experience.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I would agree with that.
So I would just, that kind of thing. And I don't know, like, it's so funny how like different aspects of the world of music don't necessarily talk to each other. So in music education, they teach a certain way, but if they knew the research that is in neurologic music therapy, they would teach music completely differently. But they don't. The two worlds don't talk to each other. Music ministry doesn't talk to music therapy. They're two completely different silos. They take completely different classes.
Right.
Like we don't exchange notes. We don't exchange research. Like, hey, here's how to use tempo. Now they probably do it intuitively.
Sure.
But here's how if you knew, then you would really do this. But I would submit that intuitively, if I think about my the music director at our church, like I've subbed as the music director and I've played in the praise band on and off for several years. Like there's an ebb and flow of tempo and intensity of the songs based on where we are in worship that tend to match where the worship is. There's kind of this, like when we're doing the anthem, either right before or after the message, it's not the fastest tempo song we do. The fastest tempo songs are usually the opening and closing.
Right.
Right. We're kind of
Absolutely,
we're more in like a contemplative. It's like where the ballad is. Like the anthem is the ballad. Like it's the feels. It's where all the feels come in. Like, back in growing up in music, like your first record, the first single from the pop star, it's like upbeat, it's fun, yay. And maybe a second one's like that. And then they introduce their ballad. It's like the second, third, or fourth, but no pop artist ever releases their ballad as the first track on their record. So
absolutely. And it's been absolutely incredible having you on the show. And I appreciate so much you taking the time to do this and talk to us about a variety of different things. And it was neat to see the interaction between all of them. So
cool. Thanks for having me.
I really appreciated Tim's vulnerability and being willing to talk about spiritual woundedness and spiritual pain. I think that there are going to be other people who listen to this episode and really relate and resonate with that. And if you're in that situation, I just encourage you. In Jeremiah 29:13, it says, "You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart." That's a promise. If you are looking for God with your whole heart, I believe that you will find him. I made a critical blunder on this podcast. Just kidding. It's not a critical blunder, but I did forget something. I forgot to ask him, what was a time that you received hope from God or another person? So I thought I would share a little bit with you just personally, if you needed a hope story for this week, because quite frankly, like we're living in a world where we need more stories of hope. I wanted to tell you about how music has given me hope. There were a couple songs in particular when I was going through my divorce that were popular at the time. And one was the Carrie Job song, I Am Not Alone. That meant so much to me because at that point in my life, that's exactly how I felt. I felt completely alone. And the song just reminded me that God was always with me. And the other song that was popular that really resonated with me was a Jeremy Camp song called He Knows. And it was this sense of Jesus knows like every pain and every suffering and every hurt that you're going through. And he can relate to that. He can relate to you in that human nature of suffering. Every time those songs would come on the radio when I was driving around for work, I would just sing at the top of my lungs. And it was like those words provided such a level of hope and encouragement to me, like, I'm going to get through this. And so I just want to encourage you, what songs are meaningful for you in this season of your life right now? God can really use music to speak truth over our lives if we will just engage with it. You can find helpful resources at hopeforanxietyandocd.com. Feel free to hop on over to the contact form. I would love to hear from you. I want to hear your story of hope and let me know if we can share it on the show sometime. I would love to compile some of those together. What's a time for you that you experience hope from God or another person? Hit us up on the contact page and let us know. Thanks so much for listening. Hope for Anxiety and OCD is a production of By the Well Counseling in Smyrna, Tennessee. Our original music is by Brandon Mangrum, and audio editing was completed by Benjamin Bynum. Until next time, may you be comforted by God's great love for you.